For more chat about geek entertainment, answers to your questions, and news from the wider world of Christian geekery, get the Christian Geek Central podcast today on iTunes and other podcast services. Well, my editing skills are crap, but can the same thing be said about The Devil Below? Stick around and find out. Clonk, clonk, clank. Clonk, clonk, clank, clonk. Clonk, clank, clonk. That's my best attempt at imitating some of the opening music of this movie. It had a really distinct sound to it. And then it just went away, which is why I don't comment on the music in any of the review, which we should get on to now. Hi, I'm Peter Franson from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions. This is my uncut review of The Devil Below. This is part of my March Movie Madness Week series of reviews, 7 days, 7 movie reviews, of which this is the third, I believe. The synopsis on IMDb reads, a group of 4 amateur adventurers who specialize in exploring remote and forsaken places pay a visit to Shookham Hills, a town in the remote Appalachian Mountains which was abandoned decades ago due to a mysterious coal mine fire. They soon discover something more startling than the mystery that sent them there. They're not alone. So, this is a horror monster movie. There are characters with different personalities and sometimes hidden motives that are trying to survive together and are progressively being picked off. So, this is a formula that in many ways you're very familiar with if you've seen, any monster movies before this one. There's a gradual reveal of the townspeople, though, who know the area best, and they add a somewhat different element to the usual band of unwitting survivors. I mean, usually you have that group of survivors, and maybe you've got one kind of expert among them, the dinosaur expert or the anthropologist or whatever the crap, somebody that goes like, oh, it's doing this pattern and da-da-da-da, and they're explaining things to you because they have some insight that the other characters don't have. Well, in this case, it's this whole settlement of people that have been living in this area and trying to keep it off of the radar. And I like that it's not one single expert, but it's rather this community. That was kind of a neat element for me. Their motives for keeping the monster secret from the world are eventually revealed, but I found them unrealistic. I was like, really? I wanted to offer like a counter argument, but I can't because I'm in the real world and they're in the movie. The overall tone and editing worked well for me, I have to say. They hide the monster in various ways, including, of course, classic darkness, imperfections of night vision when characters are forced to use that, and distorted character point of view due to injury or imperfections, things that happen to their eyes. It does have numerous jump scares, but it largely creates its suspense and its scares based on what we as an audience almost see. What we see very briefly, or what we see only an obscured version of. I remained interested in the characters and their individual driving motives and learning more about them and their values that were driving them, all the way until really the end of the movie, which is valuable to me in horror movies. But the final note requires buying into a motive that didn't make any sense to me, ending my experience on a bit of a whimper. Even so, the pacing, tone, and editing of the rest of the movie all work together to have me tense and squeezing my fists together, or just tensing my body for much of the back half of the movie. As far as the cast goes, almost entirely new faces, all of whom gave, I thought, solid performances for what you'd expect in this genre. But I would have liked for the movie to lean into performances and displayed motives a little bit more. That can make a big difference between a horror movie being forgettable and memorable, is how much they lean into the characters and get me to really care about them and their motives and their safety. And they didn't quite lean into character enough for me to for this one to be a memorable horror monster movie experience. As far as the stunts and visuals go, the monster effects are largely practical, and I always really appreciate that because my eye seems cursed to pick out CG, no matter how advanced and cutting edge it is. But the monster is either obscured or briefly shown throughout the movie. So, whether they're going with digital or practical, it's not as much of a factor. We don't really get a clear, here's the monster with big shining lights on it. I was a little let down by the visual design, which you can get a sense of after you've seen enough snippets and things of the creatures. But I didn't think that it looked cheap or cheesy. It was just kind of like, it just seemed just slightly leaning in the direction of pedestrian, and I wanted something leaning more in the direction of weird, you know? I think that the shooting style and editing, though, played to the strengths of the design and avoided the weaknesses of the design for the most part, at least what I consider to be the weaknesses. So I think that the editing worked hand in hand to kind of compensate for the things that I didn't care for as much about the monster design. As far as themes, is there anything of moral, philosophical, or spiritual significance going on in the themes of this thing that might stimulate some worthwhile thought or conversation? There's a striking moment early on that involved a likable character who seems to be a Christian later in the film, serving as an advocate for intelligent design. I think it's the first time in a mainstream movie of any kind I've heard the phrase intelligent design used, period, let alone by someone that's a likable character. And this character also maintains respect for scientific investigation. There's multiple characters that are speculating on whether or not the nature of these creatures and this dwelling place underground maybe has a connection to the concepts of hell or purgatory. And amidst that, one character defends the idea that belief in God is not incompatible with science. And that's a viewpoint that many Christians have held for a long, long time. And so it was nice to see it represented a little bit in mainstream fiction, where it's almost never represented. And I think that it could, as it happens in this movie, potentially serve as a nice springboard for conversation. However, this moment is fairly brief. It did not pay off later in any way that I noticed. I thought that with the moment they gave it early on, I was like, oh, they're going to go somewhere with that, or they're going to at least touch on this idea again later on in the movie. And at the end of the day, it felt like kind of a dead end in the script that felt left in for no apparent reason from a plot structure standpoint. I can speculate at a potentially deeper metaphor that was intended, especially if I were to find out that the writer and or director were a Christian. Then that would give me some fuel to speculate a little bit more, but I'd have to spoil some of the ending to do that, with you right now, and it would be fairly wild speculation on my part anyway. Now, I have no idea what your tastes are in movies, but if I were a time traveler, I'd go back in time and say, watch the trailer for this one. It'll give you a sense of, the monster and how they're doing the monster. It's a gore, inside-out, gross kind of horror monster, and that's definitely going to catch your interest. It won't maybe pay off to the degree that you would hope when you actually sit down and watch the movie, but this is worth watching for free or on a streaming service that you're already paying for. As far as is it worth carving out the time for, if you want, kind of a horror monster movie experience, there's not something you definitely know you'd want and would very likely enjoy, give this one a try, absolutely. The ending will leave you a bit on a deflated note, making the experience ultimately pretty forgettable, but it is more, in your estimation, than a cheap B-horror experience, and will keep you on the edge of your seat throughout most of the second half. This one's rated 16 plus on Amazon Prime, whatever that means. I would say that's probably for language and horror violence. All right, those are my thoughts. I would love to get yours in the comments below. Then stay tuned for merch movie madness every day the rest of this week. Please like, share, subscribe, click that bell to stay connected. I want to thank the Spirit Blade Insiders for making this review possible. You can get info about the benefits of joining over at patreon.com/Spirit Blade Productions. And then I hope you'll join us soon over at christiangeekcentral.com as we continue to geek out and seek the truth. The Christian Geek Central podcast is the longest-running podcast for Christian geeks with over 600 weekly episodes and counting, featuring audio versions of much of the same content you'll find here, plus exclusive content including weekly news updates from the creators of Christian comics, novels, and video games, debriefing and commentary about what I've been playing, reading, and watching, and my expanded responses to your comments and questions via YouTube, email, or the Christian Geek Central forums. And now, with timestamps, so you can jump straight to the segments you want to hear most. Get the Christian Geek Central podcast today on iTunes and other podcast services, and enjoy one more way you can geek out and seek the truth.